This is the Fixer Punk Podcast, the podcast that barely musters up enough dopamine to stay in the habit of recording a new episode every week. I'm Grayson Peltier. So, as the teaser would have you believe, this episode is about habits, productivity, and the whole trend of dopamine detox, dopamine fasting, productivity and performance optimization, and a lot of the biases and issues with these models, but also some of the potential of performance optimization, biohacking, all of these types of things that are going around to help people improve their productivity and their mental health and their mental performance. And this podcast seeks to bridge the divide between personal and social change. So this is going to be a very key issue. And I probably am going to have to do multiple episodes on this. In fact, I'm almost certain of it. Because there are a lot of angles to this whole productivity optimization, biohacking, dopamine. The dopamine thing in and of itself is a massive area of complexity and a lot of myths and things that are both wrong and right with what these people are saying. And there are a lot of philosophical angles that I am actually just learning about as somebody who really focuses on these issues and how personal becomes political. There's a lot more to this than really meets the eye in any respect. There was a TikToker who also has a Substack called sluggish.substack.com named Jess, who was discussing the dopamine detox trend specifically. And there are some interesting philosophical origins of that go back to religious asceticism. And I think that's a very interesting angle to look at it from. But I want to take it back a few more steps and analyze it from a few different angles, actually. And into the overall, not just the dopamine stuff, but the overall productivity, health, performance, all of like the health protocols that are supposed to make you perform better as a person in the workplace or in those types of settings, like the Andrew Huberman type stuff that goes around a lot. All like those performance hacks you see of the people getting up in the morning, doing sun exposure, meditating, all to make sure that their mind is optimal for the workplace and doing all these little tricks and hacks to hack their brain and getting a little bit more productivity. Which, first off, I try to do some of these things myself. I have been trying to get up, do the sun exposure stuff. I've been doing breathing protocols, a few different types of breathing protocols, like one from Huberman and then another one that actually a psychologist developed, customized supposedly based on like my breathing rhythm. I even get that stuff measured. One of the treatments that's worked best for my own autism and ADHD is neurofeedback, which is very personalized, done by a doctor. And one of the things that they do is they do track your breathing rate to figure out which breathing rate calms you down the most, I guess. So I am into a lot of these things, and I think that a lot of these types of performance optimizing, mental optimizing techniques can have a lot of benefit for individuals on a health level, on an individual health level. But the danger with them, and I've alluded to this a bit on the TikTok at FixerPunk, is that they cause us to ignore the systemic problems that are causing people's distress and the systemic reasons why people are not succeeding in life that have nothing to do with whether or not somebody has undertaken a dopamine detox, how clean their diet is, whether or not they're deep breathing and meditating before going to work, those kinds of things. And going in and just ignoring the fact that people's productivity, performance, and health is largely dictated, a lot of it, especially when we're talking about the lower classes of society, is dictated by systemic factors. And we can create a much greater impact on performance by fixing those systemic problems rather than just focusing solely on the individual. And this gets ignored pretty much all the time by the productivity hacking, all the people who have even these very rigorous scientific backgrounds. They ignore the factors that cause people to perform and have less optimal health that are not on the individual level. And also the ways that some of these techniques, like Huberman will always say that a bunch of his techniques are zero cost. But if we think about it, yeah, in a monetary sense, going outside and looking at the sun for 15 minutes doesn't really cost you any money. Going and meditating for 10, 15 minutes a day, removing sources of stimulation from your life, and not playing video games, watching TV, all those kinds of supposed vices don't cost you like literal money. But there are other ways that systemic factors influence them. And Jess, in one of her videos, I'm not sure, is it she, they? I'm not sure. I don't want to misgender. I apologize if I did. But makes the point that it is because we are trying to numb ourselves from the things that this society and capitalism is causing us. And that is a very important point to make, because this isn't just individual vice and pleasure seeking. This is people trying to make the best out of their own situation, which that's one of the biggest distinctions in the Fixer Punk brand of self-help versus these other brands of self-help, is that I genuinely believe that most people are trying to do the best they can based on their own individual circumstances, and that your own knowledge of your circumstance and your community's knowledge within whatever group you're in, especially if you're in a marginalized group, that knowledge has value, that is as valuable as the scientist who is in a lab and has determined that all your problems can be tied back to a single molecule, which is questionable science in and of itself. And there's some pretty good scientific debunkings of it. I've read one by a licensed therapist who said that although these things are extremely oversimplified and a lot of the concepts behind dopamine detox in particular are very much a myth scientifically, some of the things can help, but in a more positive way rather than this negative, or as Jess would put it, ascetic way of looking at things. So when you have these types of claims going out there, we have to look at the harms. We have to look at what is being left out of them and the ways that these cause you to judge yourself. And especially with this more philosophical angle that deals with Christianity, which I'm still a Christian. I still believe, but I've had some problems with certain segments of the church that have a very judgmental angle to things. And it's very easy when you see the self-help stuff to judge yourself very, very easily, especially when they're telling you to cut out every form of pleasure from your life. Dopamine detox, no phone, no internet, no TV, even no music, no interaction with others. All you do is meditate and journal. You need to cut out all the food from your life. Some of the dopamine fasting ones will tell you just to even completely not eat for the day, so that you reset your productivity. So it's very easy to judge yourself. But the thing is that some of these methods, I think, can be superior. Like some of the Huberman productivity optimizing stuff, the Anna Lemke stuff, the dopamine stuff, I think that I haven't studied that enough, and I may need to do a whole separate episode on Lemke, but I think some of it can be valuable, like the methods that more involve actually like recalibrating your brain's biology a little bit. Like, I don't think Huberman hasn't covered neurofeedback, but neurofeedback changed my life way more than any conventional therapy or conventional medication ever could. And some people might classify it under this self-optimization biohacking realm. So we don't want to just throw away. And this is something that more progressive and leftist thinkers need to be cautious of, is just throwing away the potential value to help people with mental health conditions of some of these techniques. They can be a breakthrough for people to improve their lives. But what we have to do is we have to get systemic ideas into conversation with them. Because the model behind these ideas, the model of having the idea where you are getting up in the morning, you're giving yourself your sun exposure, you're meditating, these are things that I'm trying to do myself. Sometimes it's pretty hard though, but I do try, and I probably have a bit more privilege than some other people do. Having to eat a very, very clean, strict, regimented, very low carb diet that is like free of preservatives and artificial processed food, whatever that means, because like as soon as you cut an apple, that makes it processed. I think one of the nutrition thinkers that, even though he's not, I don't think he's really a progressive political guy. Dr. Lane Norton, I think, is probably one of the most inclusive nutrition experts out there. And he really stresses the if it fits your macros approach, which has been a life-changing thing for me because I grew up through the era of like the super strict diets. And the only way I've even been able to remotely get myself into shape is because I've been able to find like all kinds of little hacks that allow me to eat food that's convenient, that works with my like sensory needs and my likes and dislikes, all the interesting quirks that I have because of my autism, and still like at least improve my body composition to an extent. But these like Huberman diets and stuff like that don't allow you that kind of flexibility. You have to basically just be eating like mostly vegetables and some meat, like barely any carbs. At least that's my understanding of it. And then having the time to go and do your exercise, do your zone 2 cardio, and to precisely track that you are in zone 2 when you are doing your cardio, which honestly, I was a distance runner for a while. I kind of get that stuff, but for some reason, I think probably just because of, again, the positive impacts of body composition, I've switched over to mostly a combination of strength training and more higher intensity cardio as a finisher. Because that's a little more efficient. But again, there's a matter of having the time and having the energy. Somebody who is coming home from their $7.25 an hour job working at some retail or some fast food place isn't going to go and prepare themselves a meal that's going to take 45 minutes to an hour to prepare. They're not going to go and spend another hour doing resistance training, then doing their zone 2 cardio and monitoring all that. Even though these things technically are not like, it's not like you're paying for a supplement or something like that. People are not going to be able to do that. There's only a limit to how much stuff people can tolerate in a day. And the Anna Lemkes of the world would have you believe that people need more pain in their lives, and that is the problem. And I think that's another topic we have to get back to a little bit more. But the thing is that, yeah, some of these low dopamine morning things can work. But the standard person's optimization protocols, like the standard like person that these optimization protocols are built for, it's a single white young man with plenty of disposable income, living on their own, probably in a city, no family, no major obligations, and no major health conditions. They're just trying to get themselves healthier so that they can move up from being a junior software developer to being a senior software developer, up to being chief engineer, or possibly starting their own startup and getting more, going from seed round to your A round by optimizing and getting that little bit of performance out of their brains. That's who this stuff is built around. And native knowledge is important. The optimization protocol that is going to get somebody from being some software engineer in Silicon Valley, which is where a lot of this is based around. Jess rightly brings up that a lot of this comes out of Stanford. And as a USC Trojan, I am very, very proud to dunk on Stanford whenever necessary, but I don't know if I'm going to dunk on them too hard necessarily. But that's who this is based upon. The protocol that is going to get somebody who is working for $7.25 an hour up to making $15 an hour is going to be a lot different. It's going to have to be. Their life is a lot different. And I think that protocol should really be one thing, and that's called a union. And maybe we add another supplemental hack called an increased minimum wage. I think those that you have your power combination, you have your power finisher move of strength and optimization for your prosperity right there in unions and increased wages and labor laws. But that's just me. It's going to be different for somebody that has family obligations. So like there are people that maybe you're making decent money, but you have kids, you're caring for children. Maybe you don't have as good of access to childcare. Maybe you're not making 100, 200K a year. Maybe you're making 40 to 60,000. Maybe you're not able to afford as good of like childcare. You can afford it for work maybe, but you can't afford it for, say, going and doing all this wellness stuff. You don't have someone to leave the kids with. You're not going to be able to completely rid your house of every dopamine infested sweet food because you're raising a kid, or you're in a multi-generational household. You're of an ethnic background that prefers that. And you're not going to, it really wouldn't be nice for you to just say no to whatever abuela is making because you have to stay on this extremely regimented diet to optimize your mental performance, where you can only eat vegetables and you can't, and you're constantly being tempted by abuela and her tortillas. You have to think about individual circumstances is what I'm saying here. And you have to think about the protocol that's actually going to give you results, because who knows? Heck, we could take the $7.25 an hour worker and somehow magically put them on an all vegetable diet, have them do their zone 2 cardio, have them do their mental performance enhancing stuff, wear their blue blockers at night, no dopamine, no phone, no social media, and all they're going to wind up is being more sad, more depressed, more unhappy, and still not moving up in that job. They're still going to be stuck at like the cashier level. They're not going to move up to assistant manager just because they did these performance optimizing hacks. And some people just are naturally better adapted to these types of habits and to hard work itself. And some people have been traumatized by their circumstances, physically and mentally, to the point where they cannot reach the same peak as someone who is more fresh and doesn't have these types of circumstances in their lives. And that creates confounding variables. People who can afford, in terms of time, money, and circumstances, to do these habits and have the physical and mental fortitude to be able to do them are probably more likely to be successful anyways. Because the person who can perfectly follow all of these protocols, who can completely withdraw from society without any negative consequences to do a dopamine detox, the person who has the extra time in the morning, which even though meditating and all that should take me like half an hour, it winds up taking more like an hour because I have to recover from each step mentally. The person who has the extra time to do that and doesn't have to rush out right away, get their kids to school, use every last second to chase after a bus to get to their job, that person who has that extra time was probably already more likely to be successful than the person who didn't have the time to do that. The person who has enough money to go to Whole Foods and buy organic food, probably more likely to become financially successful anyway. So you have confounding variables. So you can't go and you look at this person who's quote unquote soft, weak, and wimpy, and we don't even know all the stuff they're fighting through. We don't know how tough this person who looks like they're doing all these weak, wimpy habits of eating all that junk food all day long. We don't know how tough that person is, how hard that person's life is, whether or not the Chad software engineer from Silicon Valley would even be able to last a day in the shoes of a underpaid construction worker who is in the heat and sweating all day and not given enough water breaks. We don't know how tough that person is, but we're assuming we're ascribing this morality to them that they're weak, wimpy, and lazy for going and getting fast food after a hard day. And that is morally not right, but it also, in a practical sense, is not right. And it's, if we go and we take this data, these things are very, very rarely studied. Like, there isn't good science on any of these things. A lot of these things are just theoretical. They're protocols that are maybe based on one study, based on some sort of theory that like came out of Huberman's lab. Andrew Huberman he supposedly has a lab at Stanford, but Not quite sure how active it is, but he is a researcher there. On maybe a small group of people. It isn't like there is some massive meta-analysis study, but we have to look at those confounding variables if there were to be a study on this. Okay, is it that the low dopamine morning worked? Is it that the optimization protocol worked? Is it that getting this 1% edge in terms of your mental performance is what made the person rich? Is it that the stricter diet made the person smarter and more able to succeed? Or is it that the people who are able to adhere to that were already going to succeed anyway? So you look at, okay, you have the group of the people who fell away, who cheated on the diet, who didn't do their sun exposure, who didn't do their meditating. Those people, unsuccessful. Let's just say we got a study that had this conclusion. I don't think one exists, but I haven't really checked. I haven't spent any time on Google Scholar digging for this stuff. But if such a study did exist, you would want to critically analyze it. Okay, those people that didn't do it probably had all kinds of other circumstances in their lives that would make it harder for them to succeed anyways. But the people who did do it probably are the ones who had more comfortable lives and were more likely to be even in the room and be considered for that promotion to chief engineer or to assistant manager or VP or whatever. Again, this stuff some of these things are good ideas, even if you're in a bad situation. This is the thing. I don't want people to give up on improving themselves just because these ideas come with a lot of toxic baggage on them. And I'm going to get into some of that really toxic baggage really soon. But I don't want you to give up on things necessarily. You shouldn't give up on becoming your best self. And that's kind of a lot of the point of this podcast is we're bridging the divide between personal and social change. We're putting some of these ideas, which are new and innovative ideas in mental health, which I really hope someday that once people have that bare minimum of what they need in life, we can use that to help people improve their lives so that you can try these protocols, see if they work for you. Maybe they'll work for you. Maybe something else will work for you. But we got to give you that freedom and that ability, that economic stability, that personal stability, that social stability that allows you the chance to try and experiment and see what helps you and not just do exactly what the system tells you to do. Because I'm not saying, well, just give up on it and just take antidepressants and just do the standard stuff only. Maybe these protocols could work for you. And there is some evidence, like on a positive regard. I was reading an article again by a licensed therapist who said that that some of the low dopamine morning stuff is part of like habit building techniques in CBT, which is an evidence-based form of psychotherapy, which has its own problems. In my opinion, I think CBT is a little overused, but if you've gone to therapy, you've almost certainly gotten CBT. But there is some evidence to, she says, replace harmful compulsions with healthy habits. And it's to replace something that isn't working and finding something that does, but not to restrict pleasurable activities, which is what a lot of the focus of some of these dopamine fasting things are. I wouldn't say necessarily Huberman's main focus is restricting pleasurable activities. I think he covers a lot of different subjects, but he does bring on this Anna Lemke, who is apparently is or was the head of the addiction clinic at Stanford. And Jess, this commentator with a Substack, with that sluggish.substack.com page, what she does is she does say that this is a lot of it is based on a Protestant work ethic, and she even ties it back to eugenics and some very problematic things in the history of Stanford University. The fact that it was founded by a guy who was trying to escape workers who were going after him, who was into eugenics around race horses. And she also says that a lot of this is based on sort of a religious asceticism, that people are seeking salvation through becoming entrepreneurs, and they believe that by removing all these vices from their lives, that it'll make them closer to the godly goal of being an entrepreneur and being able to break out of capitalism. which I think that's a very powerful way to think about it. But I don't think that's the entire thing. I think there's some truth and some good ideas in these habits potentially. But there are also some ways you can really judge yourself from this. The Anna Lemke seeks to really make it a lot of stuff that's about like morality. Like she's gone and talked to Christian pastors. She's called for stricter churches even. Her book Dopamine Nation ties some of the whole dopamine addiction, this idea that we are addicted to our smartphones, we're addicted to entertainment, we're addicted to sugar, we're addicted to food, which has somewhat questionable scientific backing to it, period. But she ties a lot of things back to like moral panics around sex. And especially with the way that it gets tied back to Protestant religion and Calvinism, very morally rigid, Calvinistic Christian thought is a little bit triggering for me because I did have my own experience with churches that were basically very, very strict. They didn't seem that way on their face. These were churches that were marketing themselves around the skateboarding community, the surfing community, punk rock, things like that. But they were very morally strict and constantly telling you to look around your life for secret sins, for anything that you put before God that you need to get rid of. You need to sacrifice this at the altar. And that was a very negative influence in my life, constantly judging myself and morally really putting myself in a position where I constantly felt like I was the bad guy. And if you're familiar, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, I did mention how a quote from pro wrestler Hangman Adam Page kind of broke me out of that line of thought and it was from his monologue episode on being the elite, which I think is a really good way to deprogram a lot of these kinds of ideas. He said something to the effect of, I don't know, maybe I'm not remembering the quote exactly, but he said, am I the bad guy? Am I the bad guy in my own drunken monologue in the woods? Or is that just the way the world has conditioned me to think, when in reality I had no choice in the matter? And I think that if you've been judging yourself a lot, whether it's because you're listening to self-help people saying, and you're like, I can't get off this dopamine, I can't get off of all these dopamine things, like my phone, like the food, like all these things that give me pleasure in life that I'm addicted to, and I can't get myself to just be productive and only do productive things and only do low dopamine things. Maybe it'll help you to rid yourself of that judgment a little bit. But it does also kind of leave open what the next step is. I think I'm probably, because I pretty much just learned about this angle to these performance and productivity optimizing things as being part of a more religious set of ideas maybe a few days ago. So I may need to investigate that a little bit more and come back with another episode. But I do have to say that we have to be very careful and we have to be very vigilant as we're looking into these ideas, which they are very positive ideas. We have to understand that these are many, like these Huberman has a lot of positive things to him. I think that a lot of this is very good scientific developments, but just like any other type of scientific development in medicine, whether it's a new medication, new surgery, the access and the implementation are going to be far different for people in marginalized backgrounds than they are going to be for people in a normal background. I always like to refer back to Dr. America Bracho's TED Talk, which is about Latino health access and her efforts to help Latinos improve their health, specifically around diabetes and things of that nature. And she spoke about how doctors would always call these people non-compliant patients because they wouldn't go out and walk around the block and they wouldn't cook healthy food and all that. But it's really because these were really good people. These were people that were really trying their absolute best, but they just couldn't. Their neighborhood wasn't safe, so they didn't feel safe going out and walking or running around the block at night when there was a lot of crime in the neighborhood. There wasn't a public park where the kids could play. So we take these ideas, we look at them, we see if they work, we see if they're actually evidence-based, even in the ideal situation, if they're functional, if they help people. And then we find ways to adapt them, ways that may not be perfect. but find ways to use them in the lives of people who need the help without being judgmental toward them. And that's one of the things about Lemke is pretty, from the way I read in the Jess article, Lemke seemed like a pretty judgmental person. She was involved in a lot of drug war related stuff, promoting a lot of information about drug addiction and opioid addiction that turned out to be false, and judgmental toward chronic pain patients. She has a narrative around saying that society, the reason why people are so unhappy is because they avoid pain. They don't do enough painful things, and we're constantly trying to avoid pain. And of course, tying that back to people in pain are malingering, and that disability benefits. She's extremely judgmental to disabled people, and even has thought about certain types of disability benefits as like a moral harm, which that in and of itself is ridiculous. Because disability benefits barely pay any money. Nobody would go on them by choice. And I do think that there is a value to going through a level of pain, but it has to be for a purpose. And I think this is where people get lost. Jess brings up that a lot of these quote-unquote dopamine habits are not addictions that people are doing to constantly just pleasure themselves and increase their level of pleasure. They are a response to being able to basically dissociate from society's, from the problems in society and from the lack of economic opportunity. Jess brings up an example about the lottery, and citing a study that says that gambling represents one of the few actions that they can take to address lack of opportunities and freedoms that they experience. They are referring to people in lower socioeconomic statuses. And that's the thing, is that I do believe that to an extent tolerating pain and toughness and grit and all that stuff has value, but it has value when pursuing something valuable and when you feel supported in doing so. I think that once you have something worth fighting for, then you will fight for it. And it's even better if you have people encouraging you on that journey. But pain alone, just giving people more pain in their life, causes despair. And especially when you're causing people to fight against an opponent that they will never win against. And you are giving people false hope about saying that if they just reduce all the dopamine from their lives, all their problems are going to get better. When in fact, what you really need to do is you need to be using that energy to make systemic change, because you have all of these ideas and all these things of how you're supposed to deprive yourself, but never the people that are sitting in lush luxury who could easily make your life better without depriving themselves of really any pleasure at all. They're not being criticized by this model. And that's a problem. And we really have to bring things together for both of these ideas. So I do believe, and I've even done articles on this stuff about using pain in a positive way. But people lose their ability to do hard things after doing too many hard things. So at some point, you need to give people that comfort. You need to give people that assurance. You need to give people that security that they know that something positive is going to come out of this. Because if all you see is negative, all you see is pain around you, that's not going to help you. In fact, in many cases, positive, pleasurable things are what motivates people to be able to do harder things. And especially in someone like myself who has ADHD, that's definitely the case. But if you just deprive people entirely, that's not going to help them in any way, shape, or form. And these types of things, these higher dopamine activities, are what's keeping people apart and keeping people together and keeping them from falling apart mentally, going through a very hard situation. Should it be this way? No. We need to alleviate the root causes of this suffering and get people to a point where they feel like they have something that is worth the pain, that is worth the suffering, that is worth the trouble in their lives, But more importantly, get people to a level of security, a bare minimum level of security, where they feel like things can be better. Disability pay is not a moral hazard. I just don't get that line of thinking. Social safety nets aren't some sort of moral hazard that keeps people from working. In fact, they keep people working. The fact that we continue to have these programs is largely because they subsidize the wages for large corporations who don't pay people enough. I think Walmart employees are like the largest recipients of food stamps. So that is, I'm going to probably have to get into the more political end of this and some of the stuff Lemke is doing in a separate episode, and especially this callback into the religious space and how this is tied to religious asceticism. Do I think that this is all based on religious asceticism and eugenics? No. But do I think that there are some influences that are very problematic in these things, and a lot of influences in a lot of ways that these things can just make people feel horrible? Yes. Because once you have an idea that tells you that you are wrong and you have to deny yourself and deny that identity and that uniqueness within yourself and your knowledge of your situation in service of some stricter idea, the stricter churches, stricter social organizations. And the way Lemke even puts it is like we need to structure society in that way so it's stricter on people who are freeloading and mooching off of society, which I agree that we should be stricter on people who are freeloading and mooching off society. But I'm not talking about the people on welfare. I'm not talking about the people who are collecting disability. I'm not talking about the people who are getting any sort of public benefits. I'm talking about the people who are changing the tax code to benefit themselves and keep money that they're not entitled to, and paying less in taxes than their kids' school teachers, or paying less in taxes than their secretaries. Those are the kinds of moochers and freeloaders that we need to go after. But of course, that's not what they're talking about here. When we have a set of ideas that basically just blames people and judges them and represses who you are, then that really isn't something that leaves you wanting to go through that pain. And I love talking about wrestling storylines in this way, and especially the Adam Page storyline from AEW. But he was being judged a lot, and he didn't feel like he was being accepted, and that caused him to go into addiction, caused him to feel sad and to not want to perform at his best. But when he felt accepted, and when he felt like he had what he needed, and he had good people around him, and he was able to be himself and find what worked for him, he was able to become a champion. And yes, I know it's a wrestling storyline, but I think it's a good way of thinking about things. Is once you have that fundamental sense of security in your life, once you have people that care about you, once you have an environment that allows you to perform well, and not all this judgmental stuff, just judgmental, judgment, pain, judgment, that's not going to turn you into a productive superhero, superhuman, performance optimized everything. All it's going to do is just send you into despair. The way that you become a winner, the way that you become better in life, is when you have the support you need. And that's when you want to take on the pain. When you feel like, when you see that there is actually a light against the tunnel, that makes you more likely to go and pursue that. It makes you more likely to actually take the time and spend the energy, go through all the pain, all of the discipline, all the hard work, when you see that it is going to be worthwhile and that's not going to be futile. So we have to make a world where going through that pain is not futility. And then you'll see people perhaps going into less dopamine-inducing habits. But maybe people choose to engage in more dopamine-inducing habits because they help you get through that day. After the hard-fought match, you really look forward to that nice Wendy's burger. And you can feel like you've earned it. And you can feel good about yourself. You know that you're going in that direction that you want to go to, but you're also having the fun, and you're having a life that you want to live. And you can see glimpses of that. And you can feel good about it to some extent. It's not just all misery. If we have all this misery around us, and that is all we see, then of course everybody is going to be sad. If we are just increasingly putting higher and higher standards, which just brings us up with the Silicon Valley folks who they talk about depression in people in Silicon Valley as being because they have everything and they've fried out their dopamine receptors. No, it's because they're being asked to go higher and higher and higher and never being able to give that chance to be content or accepted in life. Of course, that's going to make somebody depressed. We don't need some overly complex, probably false neuroscientific explanation for those things. And for those of us who already understand these progressive ideas, don't dismiss the idea of performance optimization, improving your own personal health, fitness, habits. Just don't judge yourself too much when you can't do something, because these protocols aren't built for you if you're in a marginalized population. But they can help. And activism itself, fighting for a union, advocating for workers' rights, advocating for legislative change, social change, doing mutual aid work. These are all things that require productivity and performance. To be able to work a job and then go and help your mutual aid group, go and serve the homeless, to go and advocate legislatively, to deal with difficult situations where you have to collectively present demands to a boss, or to go on strike, or to deal with a legislator who's not going to be very friendly to you. These are all things that are stress-inducing activities. These are things that require high-performance mental performance. Activism and advocacy is a high-performance activity. It's a high-stress activity. And there are some ideas that we can take to, instead of just maybe just letting ourselves go, to be better at doing those kinds of things. And if the other side, if everybody who is fighting for and advocating for the ideas that are going to hurt us are following all these performance optimizing ideas, and they're able to go out there and really show their best, and we're not at our best, then that's only going to negatively impact the left and progressive and pro-labor causes. So maybe you find the habits and the techniques and the methods, whether that's improving your sleep, your diet, your exercise, all of those things. Those are positive things. They also make you a good example for people who want to become better in their lives. And knowing that progressive ideas, which is this is the thing I talk about, progressive ideas are not akin to accepting failure and just becoming weak and soft and lazy. And we shouldn't just caricaturize performance optimizing ideas as being something that's bad in and of themselves. It is the moral judgment that comes with them and the unscientific nonsense that is the bad part. But becoming a better version of yourself can help you to be a better activist and to better seek social change. There's a lot more to cover. There's a lot more to this topic than I can get to in a single episode ever, no matter how optimized I try to make this episode or not. So please subscribe and please join me for the next episode. Follow along on the social media at FixerPunk on Instagram, TikTok, on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, at Grayson Nation, GreysonNation. If you have any stories of things that you're dealing with in your life, any stories of performance optimization gone right, gone wrong, any struggles you have with activism, with union organizing, if you're on strike, if you have any comments on this episode at all, or on any issue of social importance that you want me to cover or discuss, something you're going through, some form of oppression you're going through that you think needs to get out there and needs to be discussed, please call in 844-477-7865, 844-477-PUNK. Leave a message 24/7, day or night. Just leave a message. I will listen to it. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today, and I hope you'll join me again for the next episode. This podcast is not professional advice of any sort. This content is for entertainment and general informational purposes only. We do not warrant or guarantee the accuracy of the information herein. The listener should not rely solely upon such and consult a competent professional before deciding to follow any course of action. If any medical or mental health concerns are suspected, please promptly contact a qualified physician.